Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to what is this? Week 5 of our How to Read the Bible. What is the Bible class? Kind of Bible 101. Last week, we started diving into the major portion of our Bibles, and that is narrative, that is story. Almost, what is it, 44% or 46%, almost half of our Bibles contain narrative. And then the second type of literary genre is what? Poetry. And then the third is it's a yes, prose discourse. Prose discourse is the third. So we've got narrative, story, poetry, and then prose discourse. Law is a part of prose discourse. So there's that. So last week we started simply in narrative and talking about character and some kind of the in the packet that I hope you have. If you don't, raise your hand and I'll give you another. Who needs a packet from last week? Anybody? If you haven't already, take some time and go through the packet. A lot of good, helpful stuff in there. You were crazy. 80 degrees. You brought that with you. But if you did, we'd all be sick because it'd be right back in the 20s. Dave, you need a packet. Yeah. So as we kind of talked last week, character is a portion of kind of the narrative part of the Bible that we're invited to pay attention to journey along with, and not necessarily always go and do likewise, but mainly to learn. We also learn that within the narrative portions of our Bible, oftentimes the author doesn't give moral commentary about the character. It doesn't say that we should or should not like this person, we should or should not follow this person's direction. The narrative doesn't really give us that. It invites us to pay attention to the story, to draw our own moral commentary on and our own conclusion on about the moral characteristics of the story. There are times when a name or specific descriptions about the character are very, very important. Who can give us an example that we learned last week where descriptions about a character matter? Okay. Very hairy. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good. What else? Which kind of gives off what? If he's very hairy, he's very outdoorsy, he's very rough. Yeah. Okay. That's good. What else? What about his brother? His brother was field grabber, but what about Jacob's description? Very smooth, so he's very sly, he's very slick, very good with his words. He's a deceiver. Who else? Who else? Saul. Okay, Saul and David. Saul is tall, so it gives off his pride, his kind of stature to be bigger and better and beyond. Then we have David, who we're told is kind of shorter in stature, a little bit meeker, a little bit more humble. So those types of descriptions that we have when the Bible gives them to us are important. What about now? A little bit? A little bit better? Yeah, Dave. Real quick. Yes.
Oh, it is.
Mhm. Yeah, I've got, Liz is on here.
Oh,
Yep, Liz is on. It's being zoomed and it's being recorded. Just a real quick reminder, if you got in here late, all of these classes are being recorded and they're being uploaded Sunday afternoon to our YouTube page. So if you need to go back and rewatch anything, it'll be on the YouTube page. You need. No, it's not. That would be kind of up to the teacher in order to do it. So, I know. Um, yeah, we're trying, Miss Gail. I said we're trying. So some of us, so some of our teachers are a little bit more comfortable doing it than others. But maybe I can get on the ball and work something out to where we can record that class as well and get it up. But all right, so that's character. This week we are diving into plot. And plot may be a little bit more difficult to get our minds around because some of us aren't used to trying to intentionally pay attention to the plot or a plot line within a story. But the Bible has both. The Bible has a plot and the Bible has a plot line that you can follow certain plots throughout the biblical narrative that when you get it, you're like, this makes so much more sense. You have a light bulb moment above your head that you're like, I get it. This makes so much more sense. I see it clearer, and now I'm going to try to live it out clearer as well. It's not just head knowledge; it's what I do with my head knowledge, and plot is a part of that. So to kind of get things started, before we watch the video, name some shows and or movies where the plot had a major impact on your understanding of the story, your understanding of the characters, and your understanding of the direction of the show. So at your tables, talk about this question and try to answer it. Name a show or movies where the plot has a major impact. Yep. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. All right. Any Lord of the Rings nerds in here? That should be so easy. It's yeah. Yep. You flat all over through. But name other shows or movies. Give us 5 minutes and then we'll watch the video. I want to share answers at their table from this first question. Can you name a show, a movie, plot made a major impact? Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings? The books and the movies. So, it's funny, two of the three movies that we've made were put together by faith influencers, whether it's Tolkien or Lewis.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what else? Any other stories or shows that you share?
Star Wars.
Star Wars? Okay, all right, yeah, absolutely. Wonder Woman. I love it. All right, second question. Can you identify some biblical stories where the plot played a significant role in the story? I'm going to give us 3 or 4 minutes, and it's okay if you have to sit in silence or pull out your Bibles or kind of think through it, because I'm asking you to do something that you may not be typically used to doing.
What you're talking about. In other words, what do you mean by the plot played a significant role in the story? In other words, because A, B, C, and D happened, you could see that this character was,
Okay.
you know, A, B, C, and D happened, and this is where the story's going and the impact it has on it.
Okay. You just answered your question. I try not to kind of like give you the answer, but because what you'll discover is that when you do like David, you just talk about it out loud, you're answering the question. You don't need me to give it to you. You're smart enough. You guys have got this. You don't need me to spoon feed this to you. So think of a story in the Bible. Okay, think of your favorite story.
Right.
That's too big. Go smaller. Not a plot.
It's a perfect example.
Okay. What about the plot of the I teach? So you pulled out the life of Jesus. What plot? Multiple plot lines in the story of Jesus. What's one plot that had a major influence upon your understanding of who Jesus is? Now, I want you to answer it now. I want you to think about it. That's what I want you to do. So 3 or 4 minutes at your tables. Think about your favorite story. It can be a specific event in Jesus's life. I love the story of the Cana wedding. Okay, is there a plot in that little episode of Jesus's life? I love the story of David. I love the story of Abraham. All right, there's a plot within Abraham's life. Time and time again, he tried to take matters into his own hands. He made a mess of stuff. When he trusted God, things went well. When he took control is when things went haywire. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So take a few moments at your tables. If we're having a hard time with this, we'll come back really quick, and that's okay. Because again, if you're not used to thinking like this, it's going to be hard to kind of, you can't just make it up. Force it. Stop. Spoon feed. So 3 or 4 minutes, y'all talk together, and then we'll come back. I'm gonna go back to this table. This table.
Yeah.
So what we.
That's the real person. I always thought it's stupid. Then I was, I got really far about it. It's like, yeah. When they were like going down the path, flying down,
I know it used to have anxiety. I know. That's right. They were, well.
All right, guys, let's go to the video. And then after the video, if there's some stories that you want to share, we can get to that. But here is the video on plot.
We're looking how to read different types of literature. We're going to start by talking about narrative. So, narrative.
Yep.
In a setting. Events. And how those events are collected and then arranged by an author. That's called. Basic plot line begins with a character in the setting. Then something new or unexpected happens, causing problems that lead up to some ultimate conflict, which is then resolved. The character finds herself changed, living in a new norm. Now, in reading narratives, it's important to understand every scene in the context of its larger plot line. You can make the same story have a totally different message. You ignore where it occurs in the plot. This happens all the time when people read the Bible. Really? Yeah, take, for example, the story about Gideon. There's this well-known scene where Gideon's trying to discern whether God will help him in the battle, and he requests a sign from God. Yeah, Gideon lays a little fleece on the ground and asks that in the morning that the fleece be wet with dew, but the ground totally dry. God does it. Now, if you look at the scene just by itself, what is the conflict? How can Gideon know if he'll succeed? And the resolution? Test God, ask for a sign, and find out. Yeah, and that's how many people actually read this story. and it totally misses the point because it's ignoring the larger plot line. Really? Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. You'll get the context. The story begins with Gideon and the Israelites living in fear because they're oppressed by invading people, the Midianites. Got it. Then there's a call to action. God commissions Gideon to defeat the Midianites and save. Yeah, this is shaping up to be a good story. But then Gideon's super hesitant. So he asks God to do this magic trick, a sign, so I can know it's really you talking to me. And God stoops to his level. He gives him a sign by lighting this fire. So Gideon's already asked for it. And that's when, in the next scene, God tells Gideon to tear down an altar to another god. But Gideon's so afraid, does it. So Gideon's skeptical and also a bit of a coward. Then we come to the moment where Gideon's about to face the giant, and he's still uncertain. So he asks for another sign, the police. He says, I want to know if you'll save Israel by my hand. And God gives him that sign. And he's still uncertain. Sign, which is the variation of the previous sign. Okay, so Gideon's asking for way too many signs. Exactly. In the larger context, it's clear the plot conflict is not how can Gideon discern the mysterious will of God. The real conflict is when will this guy get his act together and start trusting him? Okay, so then what's the rest? We have to keep reading. So Gideon gathers this huge army, 30,000 soldiers to fight. And God says, no, way too many men. He whittles the army down to 300. Why would he? Well, Gideon's been testing God, so now God returns the favor. He tells Gideon to arm these 300 soldiers, trumpets, and horses, and then surround the Midianites at night and make all this noise and hills, which sounds ridiculous, but Gideon does it. The noise scares the Midianites into this frenzy. They start destroying each other in the dark while Gideon looks on safely from them. So this story isn't offering the reader tips for discerning God's will. It's about God's commitment to use weak people with deep flaws to do more than they could have imagined. Okay, so short scenes like Gideon and the fleece are combined with other scenes making a larger plot. And tracing the conflict and resolution through the plot helps you see the message the author is trying to get across. Now, Gideon's story has been set alongside many other stories that are also about these flawed, often questionable leaders called judges. And each of these has its own internal plot. But then altogether, they make up a whole movement of the biblical story, the period of the judges, and that has its own unified plot. And there are many movements within the story of the Bible. Exactly. And all the smaller stories, hundreds of them, they fit within the context of their own. And then these movements together make up the building blocks of the grand plot line of the whole story of the Bible. So no matter where I'm reading in the Bible, I need to pay attention to the different layers of plot so I can read each story in context. Exactly. The Bible is such a sophisticated piece of literature. And so all these smaller plot lines keep overlapping, building up the tension. And when you back up, you can see how they've all been woven together into the unified story that leads to Jesus.
Everybody good? So last week, when we looked at Jewish meditation literature, and the one thing that I focused on was the breakdown that they had of the gentleman who started reading and his beard was brown. And then he kept on reading and he kept on reading, and the grayer it got and the whiter it got and the older he got, but he kept on reading. He kept on meditating on it. That's a part of the direction of this, because you can get overwhelmed with it. You really truly can. And you're like, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to stick to my favorite TV show, or I'm going to stick to whatever, and I'm not going to try to get it. And plot is an effort of, okay, I'm catching a little bit of what's going on in this story. Where else is it happening? Have I seen this before? What's going on here? So you're trying to follow the story, and there's plots and there's plot lines woven throughout the entire biblical narrative, and it all reaches its climax, and it's filled full of meaning in Jesus. Like, for example, Jesus's baptism. Jesus's baptism is connected to the Exodus story. of the people of God. They were in one place in Egypt. They were bound in slavery. They go through the waters into the promised land. Jesus' baptism. Jesus hadn't started his ministry just yet. He starts his ministry after he receives baptism, after he receives the announcement from heaven, "You are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." That is a plot line within the Bible. And we participate in that plot line because we ourselves, before we start our ministry, our mission, before we start off being a follower of Jesus, we are in Egypt. We are lost. We are slaves to sin. We go through the waters of baptism. We follow Jesus through the waters of baptism, out on the other side, and then bam, we're on mission. We're following Jesus into ministry. Same type of thing. Kind of makes sense. Kind of makes sense. All right. Just the overwhelmingness of this video. Any thoughts or any comments on it? Good. It's good. It's a lot of stuff. And this packet that I gave to you will kind of help. If you look at page 3, plot is the arrangement of characters and events within a narrative to communicate a message. Basic plot starts with a character in a setting. Something new or unexpected happens, causing problems that lead to a conflict, which is then resolved and the character is changed as a result. The plot is how those events are chosen and arranged by the author. And then what they do is they give this kind of 3-level description of what's called plot embedding, multi-layered biblical storylines. So the first one there for level 1 is the overall storyline of the Bible, which is kind of what we looked at when it comes towards the drama of Scripture, the meta narrative of Scripture. You've got creation, you've got the fall, story of Israel, story of Jesus, story of the church, and then the return of Jesus. So that's the major big time plot line of the biblical narrative. And within those, a bunch of other plots and other plot lines. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not going to run through all of those. And then level 3 includes the hundreds of individual narratives that make up each of those larger movements. The individual narratives include stories like Noah and the ark, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his coat of many colors, Samson, Jesus and the blind man, or Paul in prison. All of those plot line stories are connected to the overarching story of the Bible. All right. If you flip over a few pages to kind of the last section here, page 8, which will be the last page of the packet, we're going to get into setting. Setting is fun because setting requires a little bit of imagination. It requires a little bit of kind of intrigue and interest in the story as you're reading it to allow the setting to possibly open up your eyes and your attention to what's going on. So setting is a really, really fun part of this. So setting, 933. Yeah, we're going to hurt.
In every story, the action is called the setting. And since we've been learning how to read biblical narratives, let's talk about how settings work in the Bible. So, settings are a crucially important tool in the hands of the biblical authors. Really? Yeah, think of it this way. When you start a story, everything is new. The plot and the characters are a mystery until things unfold. Yeah, we have no idea what to expect. Except, authors can use the setting of a story to prepare you for what's coming. How so? Well, let's say a story begins in a courtroom. What do you think is going to happen? I expect a story about crime and justice. Yeah. Or how about the setting of a dark, cold, rundown house? Oh, something. Yeah. Exactly. So settings evoke memories and emotions because of other stories you know that happened in similar places.
The authors know this, and they could use settings to generate expectations about what could happen in this story. And a good author will get creative with settings. That's your expectations in order to make this happen all over the place. For example, think about the setting Egypt in the Bible.
Yeah, big Middle Eastern empire on the Nile.
Sure. Now think about the first biblical story where someone ends up in Egypt. It's about Abraham. God calls him to journey by faith to a new land, and he promises to give him a huge family. So he sets out, but he arrives during a famine. Now, is he going to trust God and stay in the promised land, or will he leave the land and go look for food on his own?
Yeah, Abraham leaves and goes down to Egypt.
And there in Egypt, things go downhill fast. Abraham denies that Sarah is his wife to save his own neck, and then Pharaoh tries to marry her for himself.
Okay, first impression of Egypt, not a great place to visit.
But God then rescues them. He strikes Egypt with plagues, and so Pharaoh relents and sends Abraham away with loads of wealth. So, what do we learn about Egypt as a setting from the story?
It's the place people end up because of stupid decisions. But it's also a place where God comes and rescues his people.
Yep, and the next main story in Egypt follows the same pattern. Abraham's great-grandsons make a bunch of stupid choices, and they eventually lead them to Egypt because of another famine.
Down in Egypt. Uh-oh.
So generations pass, and the family ends up as slaves in Egypt. And what do you think is going to happen?
God's going to send some plagues and rescue his people.
It's like you saw it coming. After the Israelites get back to the promised land, God tells them to never go back to Egypt for any reason. It's the place of trouble and oppression.
So when future biblical characters go to Egypt, I'm supposed to cringe.
Right. Like Solomon, at the peak of his wealth and power, he married the king of Egypt's daughter, and then he started sending the Israelites there to import Egyptian stout. And then a generation later, that alliance goes bad. Egypt oppresses Israel all over again.
So biblical settings carry with them all these memories of previous stories, which create expectation.
Yeah, it's a brilliant literary device to infuse stories with meaning. Now, biblical authors, they're brilliant. They can build up your expectations, but also creatively mess with them.
Like how?
Egypt's a perfect example. In the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus is born, his family flees to Egypt.
Uh-oh, so this is a problem.
And you would think so, but pay attention. Instead of Egypt being the bad place, it's the place of safety. Because who are they fleeing from? King Herod, who is behaving exactly like Pharaoh did, but he rules Jerusalem, not Egypt.
Matthew is messing with me to show how Jerusalem has become Egypt.
Exactly. You can find these kinds of patterns in many different biblical settings. Babylon, Moab, the wilderness, Bethlehem, the list goes on.
Which is a big list.
And it gets bigger, because sometimes the setting isn't just a place on a map, it's a type of situation. But they work the same way that settings do. For example, when people move toward the east, expect trouble. Adam and Eve were banished to the east, and then Cain wanders to the east.
People move to the east to build Babylon.
And all of these narratives are designed to point forward to when the Israelites as a people will be exiled to the east in Babylon.
Ah, nice.
Which leads to one more type of setting in biblical narrative, and that's time, or how long events take. Like time periods of 40 are often associated with stories where people's faithfulness is tested. Noah in the boat for 40 days and 40 nights. Then he gets off and gets totally drowned. The Israelites got impatient during their 40 days of waiting for Moses on Mount Sinai, so they made a golden calf. Or after the Israelite spies investigate the land for 40 days, the people rebel, so they have to wander in the desert for 40 years.
But then there's the story of Jesus, who is tested in the desert for 40 days, and he reverses the expectation. He overcomes the test.
Exactly. Across the whole Bible, places, situations, and time periods become full of meaning by evoking memories and setting expectations. And the New Testament authors reuse all of these settings to show how Jesus is the one carrying our world from the garden, out of Egypt and the wilderness, and into the new creation.
All right, so to close out, all right, to close out our time, name some shows and or movies where the setting had a major impact on your understanding of the story, characters, and direction of the show. How would you use setting to help tell a story? So the first question is, name a show where the setting mattered. It did something to the direction of the show. And second question, how would you use setting to tell a story? Or how have you used setting to tell a story? For example, when I say back when I worked at the Grand Ole Opry, that's the setting. And that immediately evokes twang and country and bluegrass or whatever assumptions that you have about country folk in Nashville. And you guys have done this as well. In West Virginia, such and such happened or take place. Immediately the setting is hillbilly, whatever else. So, or maybe, all right, so we got about 5. Well, the bell's gonna ring. So do what you can with these questions and talk about them in your group. Hope you had good, fruitful conversation. I must retract my West Virginia statement. It's not just hillbilly. When you think of West Virginia, you think of mountaineers. And if you think of mountaineers, you think of tough people who don't need others messing in their business. So I retract my insult about West Virginia. Yeah, preaching the meddling, to repenting, to setting the story right. All right, y'all. Appreciate your time. Again, take these packets Next week, we are going to be diving into the Gospels and the parables of Jesus. So we're going to try to take on 2 videos per week just so we can get through the entire series. But to remind everybody, all of these videos are on BibleProject.com. They're 100% free, along with a whole host of library of stuff that's there. And this Zoom is about to be stopped recording, but it'll be on our YouTube page. So thank you all very much. Bye, Liz. Take care.